Welcome back to our channel. Today we'll be talking about Cain and Abel. This lesson will be covered in the book of Genesis chapter 4. We're going to start by talking about who was the father of Cain and Abel. In the book of 1 John chapter 3 verses 12, it states that Cain was of that wicked one. Well, who is the wicked one? Surely not Adam, because Adam wasn't wicked. In Genesis chapter 4 verses 1, it says that Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord. Now, what's interesting is that in the book of Enoch, chapter 4, verses 10, the secret of the parables, it was God, who was one of the chief angels over the fallen angels that were later deemed to be evil or wicked. Enoch 4:10 states that the third angel name was Gadriel. He it is who showed the children of men all the blows of death, and he led astray Eve. So now that we've determined who was the father of Cain and Abel, I'd also like to point out that it was Adam who was cast out of the Garden of Eden. Now, I want to ask you a question. If all that Adam and Eve done was to eat from the fruit of the tree, and afterward they were immediately punished, Adam himself being removed from the garden while Eve stayed in the garden, then at what point did Adam and Eve have intercourse based on the timeline of your Bible? In our previous lesson, we talked about how it was Adam and Eve who both partook in the fruit. But whose fruit? The fruit of whose loins? The fruit of he who led Eve astray. Another thing I'd like to point out is that Adam and Eve didn't even know that they were naked, yet alone have the knowledge of being able to perform intercourse. Keep in mind that it was the Lord who stated himself that he was both good and evil. Here we have Cain and Abel, one considered good and the other considered evil. These two children were also twins. In Genesis chapter 4 verses 2, it goes on to say, and she again bare his brother Abel. Now, notice how the birth of both of them were not separated within a certain length of time. They happened back to back. Now, one of the things I find interesting is when I hear people talk about how it was Cain that was the wicked one and Abel was the good one. What you have to keep in mind is that it was a chain of events that led up to these behaviors. If you were to tell one child that you like their picture and the other child that you do not like their picture, that's favoritism. That particular act of favoritism will naturally cause resentment amongst the children. Now let's take a look at what happened between these two brothers. One of the things that I'd like to point out is the fact that it was Cain who showed the first act of kindness. The very first act of kindness amongst mankind was committed by Cain. Abel didn't make an offering unto the Lord until after Cain first made his offering. Now let's look at what it says in the Bible. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 3, it says that in the process of time it came to pass, and Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. Genesis chapter 4, verses 4 says that Abel, he also brought of the firstlings of his flock, and the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. Verse 5, but unto Cain and to his offering he had no respect. Now again, I'd like you to keep in mind that before Cain had made his offering unto the Lord, no one else offered anything unto the Lord. Not Adam, not Eve, and not Abel. The fact that it was on his mind and on his heart to do so proves that his intentions was out of pure kindness and that he was not wicked. Remember that it was Gadriel who showed men the blows of death. Children are not born violent. This type of behavior is taught and learned. And it clearly wasn't taught by Adam because Adam was not there. He was cast out of the garden. Adam's name is not mentioned during the birth of Cain and Abel. Adam's name isn't mentioned throughout the childhood of Cain and Abel. In verse chapter 6, it goes on to say that the Lord said unto Cain, why art thou wroth? Why is thy countenance fallen? Verse 7, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. Now, again, I want to point out that Cain was the one who initiated the first act of kindness by offering unto the Lord what no one else has even bothered to offer him. Now the Lord told him, if he doeth well, he will be accepted. But as we can see, this is clearly not the case. Instead of being accepted for his act of kindness, he was disrespected. The Lord had no respect for Cain's offering because of his favoritism towards Abel's offering. And finally, we have the birth of Seth. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 25, it states how Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and called his name Seth. For God, she said, hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Now again, I want to talk to those of you who have children, and I want to ask you a question. If your wife tells you the child that she just gave birth to came from someone other than you, I'm quite sure this would raise some questions. In this case, especially for Adam, Because you have to remember, it was Adam who said that, behold, this woman is now flesh of my flesh. He never said that she came from the Lord. Instead, somehow, he knew that Eve came from him, which also would make Eve a clone of Adam. So here we have Cain and Abel, who Eve said came from the Lord, who was also both good and evil. Cain and Abel, good and evil. And then we have Seth, who Eve also stated came from God, not the Lord, not Adam. And Seth didn't have the same qualities that Cain and Abel had, due to the fact that they had separate fathers. Now, many people have a question about when Cain was sent off after he killed Abel, and Cain went out and he got married. And a lot of people want to know where these other women came from. Well, there were plenty of other women. In Genesis chapter 5, verses 4, it says that Adam had sons and daughters. And that Adam also had a son named Seth that was in his own likeness, after his image. But keep in mind that Adam didn't have his son Seth until he was 130 years old. It also doesn't mention that he had his son with Eve. He's not talking to Eve. Eve's name isn't mentioned in the 5th chapter as far as them having the children. This is separate accounts. Adam had sons and daughters. So this answers the questions of where the other women came from. They were the other daughters of Adam, based upon the Bible. But once again, you have to keep in mind that these children were not of Eve. Adam's children were not of Eve. Adam was separated. The same as for Eve's children were not of Adam. She said it herself. Now, before we go into another chapter, I want to go ahead and wrap this up. The lessons for the day brings to the light that Cain and Abel are a product of good and evil. The Lord represents good and evil. Seth was different. Seth was a child of God. Both God and the Lord were angels. Gadriel and Yahweh. These were the chiefs of the fallen angels. The one whom which they came from was called the Most High. His name, I'm sure, or his or her name, was lost in translation due to the fact that the people who translated the Bible couldn't pronounce it. These are all facts. What I try to do is keep everything on the same page, so to speak. I try to stay with what's written in the Bible, or directly about the Bible with names, the same places, the same time, the same characters, so that I can hopefully shed some light on a subject of which many of us at one point or another has had any questions about. The moral of this lesson will be to not show favoritism amongst your children. It breeds envy, hatred, and jealousy, and we all know that God Himself said that He was a jealous God. Let us not be jealous. Let us accept those for who they are, and let us accept ourselves for who we are. Love yourself, know yourself, respect yourself, and accept yourself. Educate yourself so that someday you can educate others. Our next lesson is going to be about the birth and the life of Noah. I look forward to sharing this information with you, and I hope this message reaches you with peace and understanding. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you all next week. Let us be earthy.